Okay. We're live on Rumble. We're live on YouTube. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Relief Valve podcast. I've been talking about doing this for a while, and this was getting back into the CIA files. I had done this about a year ago, and I started with one of the first case files, which was Project Stargate. Now, I've been doing this show for about a year now. I've been kind of changing it, revamping it, trying to find ways to get out to more of an audience and make it work. I got stuck in TikTok for land for a while and got over 1,000 people, and then I was cut from there for sharing information. And, that didn't work out the way I wanted. I had started on YouTube and wasn't getting a lot because they tend to put a damper on conservatives and had a hard time going through there. And then went on to Rumble and started making at least some progress with Rumble, but it's been a progression of doing things with it. Now I'm simulcasting on YouTube and Rumble, and then uploading everything to X as well. This is the Persistence. He's one of the guys that's doing hard work in Pennsylvania. But my show here, if you want to follow me on X, and if you are on X, the Relief Valve podcast at MattPod22511, and I'd appreciate that support and anyone liking and sharing and subscribing to the show as well. But getting back to the point I was making is around the time that I've been going through kind of making changes to the show and doing different things, I had started with getting into the CIA files. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, if you're tuning into this episode, great, we've got another wacky guy that's getting information from the guy that lives under the bridge, and he claims he used to work for the CIA, or you're getting information from the next door neighbor who heard some information from a friend of a friend. But what I'm getting here is the exact opposite of that. It is directly, as ridiculous as it may sound, it is directly from the CIA's website. And they have been forced to put all of this information up and make it available to the worldwide public, not just the United States, but the interweb. Through FOIA requests, they've been forced to release information, or lost court cases, or presidential or governmental orders, and they've been forced to put all of this information up, and it's a breakdown of all of their clandestine projects going back 50 years, if not more. And I think it's really interesting because it's what they've been doing to the American people, at least specifically from our looking glass here. The American people, and how they've been, using people, manipulating people. Today we're going to get into a little more of MK Ultra for anyone that isn't really familiar with it. But I first started this journey with Project Stargate. So, unfortunately for anyone that's a Stargate SG-1 fans, the Project Stargate is not what you were thinking or hoping it was, because that's what I was kind of hoping it was, especially with such a unique name. And that wasn't the case. Project Stargate, and if people are interested, I can always revisit this fully at another time. But if you go through my show index, you can find where I talk about Project Stargate. But the CIA's Project Stargate was essentially Farsight. So it was attempting to use or cultivate the ability of certain or special human beings that could sit in a CIA black site in the United States and then see what was happening in a Russian military base, or a Russian nuclear silo. They could see two generals, or a conversation being had, or see make out little bits of information, computers or whatever. If you think about Stranger Things and Number 11, that was what they were using her for when she found the upside down and the monsters and everything. That project that they were doing with 11 was essentially Project Stargate. In fact, that was where they got the beginning of it, and their thought process of putting that all together. That's where that idea came from. In fact, there's a hollowed out facility that you can look up online. I'm going to see if I can find it here. I always get ahead of myself. So the brief synopsis here is Project Stargate was a secret U.S. military unit established in 1977 at Fort Meade, Maryland by the Defense Intelligence Agency and the SRI International, a California contractor, to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic intelligence applications. The project and its precursors and sister projects originally went by various code names: Gondola Wish, Stargate, Grill Frame, Center Lane, Project CF, Sunstreak, and Scanate, until 1991, where they were consolidated and rechristened as the Stargate Project. So the Stargate Project's primary work primarily involved remote viewing, the purported ability to psychically see events, sites, or information from a great distance. So just like she was doing in Stranger Things. Project was overseen until 1987 by Lieutenant Frederick Holmes, Skip Atwater, an aide and a psychic headhunter to Major General Albert Stubblebine, and later president of the Monroe Institute. This unit was small scale, comprised of about 15 to 20 individuals, and was run out of an old, leaky wooden barracks. It was Project Stargate was terminated and declassified in 1995 after a CIA report concluded that it was never useful in any intelligence operation. Information provided by the program was vague and included irrelevant and erroneous data, and there were suspicions of interjudge reliability. The program was featured in the 2004 book and 2009 film, both titled "The Men Who Stare at Goats." So some people might be familiar with that movie. It wasn't George Clooney. It was the other one that was in it. Now I can't remember his name. Although neither mentions it by name, George Stephanopoulos in his 2024 book The Situation Room mentions the product by name Grill Flame in discussing a May 8th, 1980 Situation Room briefing for President Carter after Carter's failed hostage rescue mission in Iran on the April the 24th, 1980. I wanted to try and find the building. It shows, you can go online and you can see pictures of like a broken old hollowed out building, and it's a little reminiscent of, you know, I don't know if the place Eleven escapes from, or it seems like what's left of a very old facility of like something she would have been, that she was being kept in the show. I wanted to find, this is Fort Meade. It was transferred to Fort Meade, Maryland. But before that, it was being run out of this weird kind of broken down area that just looks like what's left of a oh, The Men Who Stare at Goats. It was George Clooney that played in that one. But the hollowed out building, I'm not finding it here. I'll encourage you, if you're curious about it, to go take a look at it. But it's like it almost seems like it's what's left of like one part of a fortress or something. And that's all that's there. A little bit of the barracks and a little bit of the, destroyed cement in rooms that might have been there that they were keeping people in. And then that was a little how the show got that facility that she was being held in, that large cement facility. It was almost very similar to that. So for anyone that's interested in that down the road, I can revisit Project Stargate at a later time. But today I was going to focus primarily on Project MK Ultra. So Project MK Ultra was dosing Johns and people, Johns or guys that were hiring prostitutes and others, and hitting them with LSD. And if you'll remember Charles Manson, they were doing it to Charles Manson. That was one of the reasons he started as a regular criminal. Was brought up by started testing on by the CIA, and then became more and more violent and paranoid as time went on. And they would keep bailing him out of jail. They would keep giving him more of the LSD, and they keep giving him more opportunities. He was, I'm in my 40s, so if anyone that remembers around that time of the cult leader Charles Manson, born November 12th, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, and died November 19th, 2017, in prison, I believe. Kern County, California, was an American criminal and cult leader whose followers carried out several notorious murders in the late 1960s. Their crimes inspired the best-selling book Helter Skelter in 1974. Manson was born to a 16-year-old girl and a man he never knew, after which his mother was in prison for armed robbery. He lived with an aunt and uncle in West Virginia beginning at age 9. He spent much of his life in juvenile reformatories or in prison for crimes that included petty larceny, armed robbery, burglary, and auto theft. And then it kind of started from there, where the CIA started working with him and dosing him with LSD. Following his release from prison in 1967, Manson moved to San Francisco, where he attracted a small but devoted group of followers from among the city's bohemian youth culture. By 1968, he had become the leader of the Family, a communal religious cult dedicated to studying and implementing his eccentric religious teachings, which were drawn from science fiction as well as the occult and fringe psychology. He preached the coming of an apocalyptic race war that would devastate the United States, that's interesting, and leave the family in a position of dominant power. Manson's hold over his followers, hold on here. Manson's hold over his followers was graphically illustrated in 1969 when the family carried out several murders on Manson's orders. The most famous victim was actress Sharon Tate, wife of film director Roman Polanski, who was killed in her Los Angeles home along with 3 guests. The ensuing trial of Manson and his followers in 1970 attracted national attention. In 1971, Manson was sentenced to death, but following the abolition of capital punishment in California in 1972, his sentence was commuted to life in prison. He became eligible for parole in 1978, but was denied, and then as well as in numerous subsequent hearings. Now, the reason this is important is because he was part of the government program, or brought into it, into MK Ultra, which slowly turned him from this crazy criminal that was doing petty larceny, robbery, whatever, to a cult leader and murderer. And this was how the CIA ties into this, and we're going to be getting into their files in just a minute here. The murders inspired numerous books and movies, both documentary and fiction. In addition to Helter Skelter, which was co-written by the prosecutor of the murder trial, books included the biography Manson, The Life and Times of Charles Manson by Jeff Gunn, and The Member of the Family, My Story of Charles Manson, Life Inside His Cult, and The Darkness That Ended the 60s in 2017 by Diane Lake. A former member of Manson's family film and television adaptations included Helter Skelter 1976 and Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood 2019. The documentaries Manson Speaks Inside the Mind of a Madman in the Manson Cult, The Lost Tapes, and the 2020 series Helter Skelter, An American Myth. There's also a book that's called Chaos that gets into all of this. It's not only talking about Manson, but it's talking about Project MK Ultra and everything that it did as well. Now, before we get into all the files, which I have set up right here for Project MK Ultra directly from the CIA, I'm going to give you a brief explanation here of what Project MK Ultra was, and then we'll go into all the paperwork and correspondence coming from the CIA about the project. So MK Ultra was a human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used during interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. The term MK Ultra is a CIA cryptonym. MK is an arbitrary prefix standing for the Office of Technical Service, and Ultra is an arbitrary word out of a dictionary to denominate the project. MK Ultra began in 1953 and was halted in 1973. Ultra uses numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states and brain functions, such as the covert administration high doses of psychoactive drugs, particularly in this case, in Manson's case, LSD, and other chemicals, without the subject's consent. Additionally, other methods beyond chemical compounds were used, including electroshock, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. MK Ultra was preceded by Project Artichoke. It was organized through the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence and coordinated with the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. The program engaged in illegal activities, including the use of U.S. and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. MK Ultra's scope was broad, with activities carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions aside from the military, including colleges and universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated using front organizations, although some top officials at these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. Project MK Ultra was revealed to the public in 1975 by the Church Committee, named after Senator Frank Church of the United States Congress, and Gerald Ford's United States President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, the Rockefeller Commission. Investigative efforts were hampered by CIA Director Richard Helms' order that all MK files be destroyed in 1973. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigations relied on the sworn testimony of direct participants and on the small number of documents that survived Helms' order. And we're going to be getting into those documents here with MK Ultra right after I'm done reading you this. You're going to see the files right here, as they are for real, uploaded by the CIA, available to all of us on the internet, and we're going to go through them, including their correspondence, back and forth through all the files, discussions about, human test projects. Small parts will be redacted. It'll be people that are either still currently in office, held a high rank, or, were undercover or something like that. So the origin of the project started really with the Nazis. They were working in concentration camps of Auschwitz and Dachau, conducted an interrogation on human subjects, experiments on human subjects. Substances such as barbiturates, morphine derivatives, hallucinogens such as mescaline were employed in experiments conducted on Polish, Russian, Jewish, and other nationality prison of war. They aimed to develop a truth serum, which would, in the words of the laboratory, assist to Dachau scientist Kurt Plotner eliminate the will of the person examined. American historian Stephen Kinzer argues that the CIA project was a continuation of these earlier Nazi experiments, citing the numerous German scientists who were hired to work for the U.S. as part of Operation Paperclip. So I'm going to get to some of the other parts here. Now, when they were doing some of this, they first started doing it in multiple aspects, which I read to you earlier. And they were doing it to John. So basically a guy would show up to a whorehouse, and there would be a two-way mirror that's there, though that man would not know. The woman would have, the prostitute would have the LSD. She would drug the man, and then, they'd have sex and do their thing. And then afterwards, they would get them talking and get information and different things out of them. These were just regular guys. These are regular guys doing this, but they wanted to see the vulnerability that human beings had to the drug, and how it would open you up and make you just start yapping about anything and everything. So it started there and eventually made its way to grabbing criminals like Charles Manson and using it on him, and starting an entire, his rise to infamy in having the cult and the multiple murders that he did. But that was all part of this project. I want to find that one part for you before we move on directly to the CIA's files. So, experiments on Americans. Places over 1,000 American soldiers who willingly volunteered for testing and chemical warfare experiments. Phase 2 had 96 volunteers and were induced with LSD and the evaluation of the possibility of intelligence uses of the drug. The third phase included Projects Third Chance and Derby Hat, which conducted experiments on 16 unwitting non-volunteer subjects after receiving LSD were interrogated as part of Operation Field Tests. After retiring in 1972, Gottlieb dismissed his entire effort for the CIA's MK Ultra program as useless. Files discovered at 77, containing 700 pages of new information, showed that experiments had continued until Gottlieb ordered the program halted on July 10th of 72. So the LSD, we'll finish here and get into the files. In 1938, LSD was created by Albert Hofmann at the Sandoz Laboratories in Basel, Switzerland. The early directors of MK Ultra became aware of the existence of LSD and sought to use it for mind control. In the early 1950s, MK Ultra director Sidney Gottlieb arranged for the CIA to buy the entire supply of LSD for $240,000, which in 2024 would be $4,227,000. This LSD supply gave Gottlieb the ability to fulfill his experiment by spreading LSD to prisons, hospitals, institutions, clinics, and foundations in order to see how citizens would react to the drug without knowing exactly what was happening to them. So, in the case of Charles Manson, was where you got the putting it into the prison system and how he ended up getting his hands on it. Early CIA efforts focused on LSD-25, which later came to dominate many of MK Ultra's programs. The CIA wanted to know if they could make Soviet spies defect against their will, and whether the Soviets could do the same to CIA's own operatives. Documents obtained by the CIA, John D. Marks under Freedom of Information in 1976, showed that in 1953, the CIA considered purchasing 10 kilograms of LSD, enough for 100 million doses. The proposed purchase aimed to stop other countries from controlling the supply. The document showed the CIA purchased some quantities of LSD from Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland. So once Project MKUltra started in April 1953, experiments included administering LSD to mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, prostitutes, people who could not fight back, as one agency officer put it. In one case, they administered LSD to a mental patient in Kentucky for 174 days. They also administered LSD to CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, other government agents, and members of the general public to study their reactions. The aim was to find drugs that would bring out deep confessions or wipe a subject's mind clean and program them as a robot agent. Military personnel who received the mind-altering drugs were also threatened with court-martial if they told anyone about the experiments. LSD and other drugs were often administered without the subject's knowledge or informed consent, a violation of the Nuremberg Code. The U.S. had agreed to follow after World War II. Many veterans who were subjected to experimentation are now seeking legal and monetary reparations. Now, specifically when I'm talking about the Johns here, this is Operation Midnight Climax that is attached to MK Ultra. The CIA set up several brothels within agency safe houses in San Francisco to obtain a selection of men who would be too embarrassed to talk about the events. The men were dosed with LSD, the brothels were equipped with one-way mirrors, and the sessions were filmed for later viewing and study. In other experiments where people were given LSD without their knowledge, they were interrogated under bright lights with doctors in the background taking notes. They told subjects they would extend their trips if they refused to reveal their secrets. The people under this interrogation were CIA employees, U.S. military personnel, and agents suspected of working for the other side in the Cold War. Long-term debilitation and several deaths resulted from this. Heroin addicts were bribed into taking LSD with offers of more heroin. So that's how the dissemination of the Project MK Ultra was brought into the public and brought to the people. So let's get into the CIA files here. This was approved for release 12/12/2018. And basically these first forms here is what I just read to you. MK Ultra was first brought to wide public attention in 1975 by the U.S. Congress through investigations by the Church Committee and known as Rockefeller Commission, yada yada. This is going to be the contents: title and origins, goals, budget, experiments, LSD, other drugs, hypnosis and magic, Canadian experiments. This is what's going to be in all this paperwork. Revelations, U.S. General Accounting Office report, legal issues involving informed consent, extent of participation, notable subjects, incidents, Dr. Frank Olson, comma suicide, and then references through 11, 12, and 13. So approved for release here. Of course, they have to have it so small. I want to get in there. Division by the word ultra, which had previously been used to designate the most classification of World War II intelligence. Other related info. Give me. How do we zoom in on this? There we go. That's better. All right. So, precursor of the MK Ultra program began in 1945, and the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency was established and given the responsibility for Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was a program to recruit former Nazi scientists. Some of these scientists studied torture and brainwashing, and several had just been identified and prosecuted as war criminals during the Nuremberg trial. So after we prosecuted them as Nuremberg, we said, hey, you want to come work for us? Several secret U.S. government projects grew out of Operation Paperclip. These projects included Project Chatter, established 1947, and Project Bluebird, established 1950, which was later renamed to Project Artichoke in 51. Their purpose was to study mind control, interrogation, behavior, modification, and related topics. Headed by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the MK-Ultra project was started on the order of CIA Director Allen Dulles on April 13, 1953, largely in response to Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean use of mind control techniques on U.S. prisoners of war in Korea. The CIA wanted to use similar methods on their own captives. The CIA was also interested in being able to manipulate foreign leaders with such techniques and would later invent several schemes to drug Fidel Castro. Experiments were often conducted without the subject's knowledge or consent. In some cases, academic research was being funded through grants from the CIA, from organizations that were unaware that their work was being used for these purposes. Now, again, bear in mind, everyone, this is exactly from the CIA's own files that have been uploaded online now. In 1964, the project was renamed MK Search. The project attempted to produce a perfect truth drug for use in interrogating suspected Soviet spies during the Cold War, and generally to explore any other possibilities of mind control. Another MK-Ultra effort, Sub-Project 54, was the Navy's top-secret perfect concussion program, which used suboral frequency blasts to erase memory. Because most MK-Ultra records were deliberately destroyed in 1973 by order of then CIA Director Richard Helms, it has been difficult, if not impossible, for investigators to gain a complete understanding of more than the 150 individually funded research sub-projects sponsored by MK-Ultra and related CIA programs. So that's something to bear in mind here. What I'm reading to you is what survived. They have, of course, drink of water there. They have, of course, destroyed files. That's going to be some of the most sensitive and most damaging things. As if this isn't quite bad enough completely on its own. They've gotten rid of some of the worst, if you can try to imagine what that is. The agency poured millions of dollars into studies probing dozens of methods of influencing and controlling the mind. One 1955 MK Ultra document gives an indication of the size and range of the effort. This document refers to the study of an assortment of mind-altering substances described as follows. 1. Substances will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to the point where the recipient would be discredited in public. 2. Substances will increase the efficiency of meditation and perception. This is their goals in here, and this is their own words, what they're saying they're doing. Materials will prevent or counteract the intoxicating effect of alcohol. Materials will promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol. Materials will produce the signs and symptoms of recognized diseases in a reversible way, so they may be used for malingering. Materials will render the induction of hypnosis easier or otherwise enhance its usefulness. Substances which will enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture, and coercion during interrogation and so-called brainwashing. Materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia for events preceding and during their use. 9. Physical methods of producing shock and confusion over extended periods of time and capable of surreptitious use. Substances which produce physical disablement such as paralysis of the legs, acute anemia, etc. Substances which will produce pure euphoria with no subsequent letdown. Substances which will alter structure in such a way that the tendency of the recipient to become dependent upon another person is enhanced. A material which will cause mental confusion of such a type that the individual under its influence will find it difficult to maintain a fabrication under questioning. Substances will, now I got like Siri or something answering a question for me. A material which will cause mental confusion of such a type that the individual will find it difficult to maintain fabrication. Substances which will lower the ambition and general working efficiency of men when administered in undetectable amounts. Substances which promote weakness or distortion of the eyesight or hearing faculties, preferably without permanent effects. A knockout pill which can surreptitiously be administered in drinks, food, cigarettes, as an aerosol, etc., will be safe to use, provide a maximum amnesia, and be suitable for use by an agent types on an ad hoc basis. A material which can be surreptitiously administered by the above routes and in which very small amounts will make it impossible for a man to perform any physical activity whatsoever. Historians have asserted that creating a Manchurian candidate subject through mind control techniques was a goal of MK Ultra and related to CIA projects. So they weren't just they're going to reference LSD here. They weren't just looking into LSD. They were looking for any other drugs, products, in techniques that would help in manipulating human beings. LSD, as far as it goes to Charles Manson and how it was being administered to the through the prison system, is one of the biggest examples you're going to find in these examples. So let's get going here. So we're going to go back to this part of the page now. A secretive arrangement granted the MK Ultra program a percentage of the CIA budget. The MK Ultra director was granted 6% of the CIA operating budget in 1953 without oversight or accounting. So the MK Ultra was a black book operation. An estimated US $10 million or more was spent. CIA documents suggest that the chemical, biological, and radiological means were investigated for the purpose of mind control as part of MK Ultra. Early efforts, LSD. Early efforts focused on LSD, which later came to dominate many of MK Ultra's programs. Experiments included administering LSD to CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, other government agents, prostitutes, mentally ill patients, and members of the general public in order to study their reactions. LSD and other drugs were usually administered without the subject's knowledge or informed consent, a violation of the Nuremberg Code that the U.S. agreed to follow after World War II. Efforts to recruit subjects were often illegal, and even discounting the fact that drugs were being administered through actual use of LSD, for example, was legal in the United States until October 6, 1966. In Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA, I referenced this earlier, the CIA set up several brothels to obtain a selection of men who would be too embarrassed to talk about the events. The men were dosed with LSD, the brothels were equipped with one-way mirrors, and the sessions were filmed for later viewing and study. Some subjects' participation was consensual. In many of these cases, the subjects appeared to be singled out for even more extreme experimentation. In one case, volunteers were given LSD for 77 consecutive days. LSD was eventually dismissed by MK Ultra's researchers as too unpredictable in its results. Although useful information was sometimes obtained through questioning subjects on LSD, not uncommonly the most marked effect would be the subject's absolute and utter certainty that they were able to withstand any form of interrogation attempt, even physical torture. So, other drugs in the project. Another technique investigated was connecting a barbiturate IV into one arm and an amphetamine IV into the other. The barbiturates were released into subject first, and as soon as the subject began to fall asleep, the amphetamines were released. The subject would begin babbling incoherently at this point, and it was sometimes possible to ask questions and get useful answers. Other experiments involved heroin, morphine, diazepam, used under the code name MK Search, mescaline, psilocybin, scopolamine, marijuana, alcohol, sodium pentothal, and ergine in Subproject 22. Another attempt that they made, hypnosis and magic. Declassified MK Ultra documents indicate hypnosis was studied in the early 1950s. Experimental goals included the creation of a hypnotically induced anxieties, hypnotically increasing ability to learn and recall complex written matter, studying hypnosis and polygraphs examinations, hypnotically increasing the ability to observe and recall complex arrangements of physical objects, and studying relationship of personality to susceptibility to hypnosis. In addition, the CIA used the services of American magician John Mulholland to write 2 manuals on sleight of hand and undercover communication techniques in 1973. Virtually all documents related to MK Ultra were destroyed. Mulholland's manuals were thought to be among them until a single surviving copy of each was discovered in the agency's archives around 2008-2009. Bob Wallace and H. Keith Melton published the official CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception to chronicle the research into the use of illusion from the agency's field agents. Now we move on to the Canadian experiments. The experiments were exported to Canada when the CIA recruited Scottish psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron, creator of the psychic driving concept, which the CIA found particularly interesting. Cameron had been hoping to correct schizophrenia by erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche. He commuted from Albany, New York to Montreal every week to work at the Allen Memorial Institute of McGill University and was paid $69,000 from 1957 to 1964 to carry out MK Ultra experiments there. In addition to LSD, Cameron also experienced with various paralytic drugs as well as electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power. His driving experiments consisted of putting subjects into drug-induced coma for weeks at a time, up to 3 months in one case, while playing tape loops of noise or simple repetitive statements. His experiments were typically carried out on patients who had entered the Institute for minor problems, such as anxiety disorders and postpartum depression, many of whom suffered permanently from his actions. His treatments resulted in victims' incontinence, amnesia, forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking their interrogators were their parents. His work was inspired and unparalleled by the British psychiatrist Dr. William Sargant at St. Thomas Hospital, London, and Belmont Hospital, Surrey, who was also involved in the intelligence services and who had experimented extensively on his patients without their consent, causing similar long-term damage. Dr. Cameron and Dr. Sargant are the only two identified Canadian experimenters, but the MK Ultra file makes reference to many other of the unnamed physicians who were recruited by the CIA. It was during this era that Cameron had become worldwide as the first chairman of the World Psychiatric Association, as well as president of the American and Canadian Psychiatric Associations. Cameron had also been a member of the Nuremberg Medical Tribunal in 46 to 47. So these guys went out there, started up these associations we're all supposed to listen to and be a part of, and are doing horrible mental experimentation on American and Canadian citizens. Project MK Ultra Intellipedia. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MK Ultra files destroyed. Pursuant to this order, and this is why we're not going to have the really meat and potatoes of MK Ultra in here. We're going to have everything that they were able to recover and file. Ordered all MK Ultra files destroyed. Pursuant to this order, most CIA documents regarding the project were destroyed, making a full investigation of MK Ultra impossible. So you can imagine what horrible things they were really doing, aside from Charles Manson, that made them need to burn all of this so that it couldn't come out in the light. In December 1974, the New York Times reported that the CIA had conducted illegal domestic activities, including experiments on U.S. citizens during the 1960s. That report prompted investigations by the U.S. Congress in the form of the Church Committee and by a presidential commission known as a Rockefeller Commission that looked into domestic activities of the CIA, the FBI, and intelligence-related agencies of the military. In the summer of '75, Congressional Church Committee reports and the Presidential Rockefeller Commission report revealed to the public for the first time that the CIA and the Department of Defense had conducted experiments on both unwitting and cognizant human subjects as part of an extensive program to influence and control human behavior through the use of psychoactive drugs such as LSD, mescaline, and other chemical and biological and psychological means. They also revealed that at least one subject had died after administration of LSD. Much of what the Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission learned about MK Ultra was contained in a report prepared by the Inspector General's office in 1963 that had survived the destruction of records ordered in 1973. However, it contained little detail. The Congressional Committee investigating the CIA research chaired by Senator Frank Church concluded that prior consent was obviously not obtained from any of the subjects. The committee noted that the experiments sponsored by these researchers call into question the decision by the agencies not to fix guidelines for experiments. Following the recommendations of the Church Committee, President Gerald Ford in '76 issued the first executive order on intelligence activities, which, among other things, prohibited experimentation with drugs on human subjects, except with the informed consent in writing and witnessed by a disinterested party of each such human subject. In accordance with the guidelines issued by the National Commission, National Commission, subsequent orders by Presidents Carter and Reagan expanded the directive to apply to any human experimentation. On the heels of the revelations about the experimentations, similar stories resurfaced regarding U.S. Army experiments in 1975. The Secretary of the Army instructed the Army Inspector General to conduct investigation. Among the findings of the Inspector General was the existence of a 1953 memorandum penned by then Secretary of Defense Charles Irwin Wilson. Documents show the CIA participated in at least 2 of Department of Defense committees during 1952. These committee findings led to the issuance of the Wilson Memo, which mandated, in accordance with the Nuremberg Code protocols, that only volunteers be used for experimental operations conducted by the U.S. Armed Forces. In response to the Inspector General's investigation, the Wilson Memo was declassified in August 75. With regard to drug testing within the Army, the Inspector General found that the evidence clearly reflected that every possible medical consideration was observed by the professional investigators at the medical research laboratories. However, the Inspector General also found the mandated requirements of Wilson's 53 memorandum had been only partially adhered to. He concluded that the volunteers were not fully informed, as required, prior to their participation in the methods of procuring their services. In many cases, appeared to have not been in accord with the intent of Department of Army of policies governing the use of volunteers in research. Other branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, Air Force, for example, were found not to have adhered to Wilson's memo stipulations regarding voluntary drug testing. In 1977, during a hearing held by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence to look further into MK-Ultra, Admiral Stansfield Turner, the director of Central Intelligence, revealed that the CIA had found a set of records consisting of about 20,000 pages that had survived the 1973 destruction orders, due to having been stored at a record center not usually used for these documents. These files dealt with the financing of MK-Ultra projects and as such contained few details of the projects, but much more was learned from them from the Inspector General's 1963 report. In Canada, the issue took much longer to surface, becoming widely known in 1984 on a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation news show, The Fifth Estate. It was learned that not only had the CIA funded Dr. Cameron's efforts, but perhaps even more shockingly, the Canadian government was fully aware of this and had later provided another $500,000 in funding to continue the experiments. The revelation largely derailed efforts by the victims to sue the CIA, as their U.S. counterparts had, and the Canadian government eventually settled out of court for $100,000 to each of the 127 victims. None of Dr. Cameron's personal records of his involvement with MK-Ultra survive, since his family destroyed them after his death from a heart attack while mountain climbing in 1967. So that's amazing. The Canadian government was participating in Project MK-Ultra and offering funding to the CIA to do their part to help it keep going. That was something that I didn't know when I was learning about all this. This is really interesting. The U.S. General Accounting Office report. So the U.S. General Accounting Office issued a report on September 28, 1994, which stated that between 1940 and 1974, DoD and other national security agencies studied thousands of human subjects in tests and experiments involving hazardous substances, the quote from the study said. Working with the CIA, the Department of Defense gave hallucinogenic drugs to thousands of volunteer soldiers in the 1950s and 1960s, in addition to LSD. The Army also tested quincindiol benzylate, a hallucinogen codenamed BZ, note 37. Many of these tests were conducted under the so-called MK-Ultra program, established to counter perceived Soviet and Chinese advances in brainwashing techniques. Between 1953 and 1964, the program consisted of 149 projects involving drug testing and other studies and on winning human subjects. The legal issues involved with informed consent. The revelations about the CIA and the Army prompted a number of subjects or their survivors to file lawsuits against the federal government for conducting the illegal experiments. Although the government aggressively and sometimes successfully sought to avoid legal liability, several plaintiffs did receive compensation through court order. Out-of-date settlement acts of Congress. Frank Olson's family received $750,000 by a special act of Congress, and both President Ford and CIA Director William Colby met with Olson's family to publicly apologize. Previously, the CIA and the Army had actively and successfully sought to withhold incriminating information, even as they secretly provided compensation to the families. One subject of an Army drug experimentation, James Stanley, an Army sergeant, brought an important, albeit unsuccessful, suit. The government argued that Stanley was barred from suing under a legal doctrine known as the Ferris Doctrine after a 1950 Supreme Court case, Ferris versus the United States, that prohibits members of the armed forces from suing the government from any harms that were inflicted incident to service. In 1987, the Supreme Court affirmed. So that guy got fucked. I mean, if you gave him, if you were experimenting on him under Project MK Ultra, you weren't allowed to do that. He had to have given written or verbal consent after the changes that were made after shutting down Project MK Ultra. So they're experimenting on him, or during that time frame, they were in complete violation, and they screwed that soldier over. Highlight it. White on this light black on white. It's almost like white on white is not easy to read. So the defense in a 5-4 decision until that dismissed Stanley's case. The majority argued that a test for liability that depends on the extent to which particular suits would call into question military discipline and decision making would itself require judicial inquiry into, and hence intrusion upon, military matters. In dissent, Justice William Brennan argued that the need to preserve military discipline should not protect the government from liability and punishment for serious violations of constitutional rights. That's exactly right. Just because that soldier has agreed to service, I mean, doesn't mean that you own him so much he's not allowed to, he loses all his decision-making privileges or his right to their own bodily autonomy. The medical trials at Nuremberg in 1947 deeply impressed upon the world that experimentation with unknowing human subjects is morally and legally unacceptable. The United States Military Tribunal established the Nuremberg Code as standard against which to judge German scientists who experimented with human beings. Remember, I said earlier on, when I started the show, Project MK Ultra was just a continuation of Nazi experiments that were already gone in place after the Nuremberg trials were over. We brought several Nazi scientists to work for the United States, and we also brought the people that were working on their particular version of what would become MK Ultra for us. So we just continued and expanded upon the Nazi project. The medical trials at Nuremberg deeply impressed in scientists who experimented with human subjects. In defiance of this principle, military intelligence officials began surreptitiously, I'm saying that wrong. It's been a long day, I'm sorry. Testing chemical and biological materials, including LSD. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing a separate dissent, stated, "No judiciary crafted should insulate from liability the involuntary and unknowing human experimentation alleged to have occurred in this case. Indeed, as Justice Brennan observes, the United States played an instrumental role in the criminal prosecution of Nazi officials who experimented with human subjects during the Second World War, and the standards that the Nuremberg military tribunals developed to judge the behavior of the defendants stated that this voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. To satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts, if this principle is violated, the very least the society can do is to see that the victims are compensated as best they can be by the perpetrators. This is the only Supreme Court case to address the application of the Nuremberg Code to experimentation sponsored by the U.S. government, and while the suit was unsuccessful, dissenting opinions put the Army and by association the entire government on notice that the use of individuals without their consent is unacceptable. The limited application of the Nuremberg Code in U.S. courts does not detract from the power of the principles it espouses, especially in light of stories of failure to follow these principles that appeared in the media and professional literature during the 1960s and 70s, and the policies eventually adopted in the mid-70s. In another lawsuit, Wayne Ritchie, a former United States Marshal, alleged that the CIA laced his food or drink with LSD at a 1957 Christmas party, while the government admitted it was at the time drugging people without their consent. U.S. District Judge Marilyn Hall Patel found Ritchie could not prove he was one of the victims of MK Ultra and dismissed the case in 2007. That's fucking convenient, isn't it? Extent of participation. 44 American colleges or universities, 15 research foundations, or chemical or pharmaceutical companies and the like, including Sandoz, currently Novartis, and Eli Lilly and Company, 12 hospitals or clinics, in addition to those associated with universities, and 3 prisons, are known to have participated in MK Ultra. Now, when you go to a hospital, or you go to a research center, or you go, you're getting treated for mental health, you assume that these people are on the level with you, they're treating you fairly, and they're giving you medication that you should be getting. But this says right here that during Project MK Ultra, they were using colleges, universities, 15 research foundations, chemical or pharmaceutical companies, including Sandoz, Novartis, Eli Lilly and Company, 12 hospitals. So 12 hospitals that you would go to or take your family to voluntarily decided to drug patients without their knowledge in working with Project MK Ultra or clinics, in addition to those associated with universities, and of course the 3 prisons. And that's how you got Charles Manson, because he was in prison during the time when they were using Project MK Ultra and they were dosing Charles Manson. But to think that these places that you should be able to trust, you can't. And I think with everything that we've gone through over these past 5-6 years at this point, since COVID started, and we learned about these doctors that are willing to sign their names to lies, and doctors that are not willing to help patients who needed help because they were going to do it their way, and how the establishment has lied to us, the media has lied to us, the government has lied to us. You read stuff like this and you go, you're just really confirming for me what we've already learned at this point, right? But this is all the CIA's documentation that they were forced to put forward, and everything that survived the destruction of everything anyway. So continues on a notable subjects. A considerable amount of credible circumstantial evidence suggests that Theodore Kaczynski, also known as the Unabomber, participated in CIA-sponsored MK Ultra experiments conducted at Harvard University from the fall of 1959 through the spring of 1962. During World War II, Henry Murray, the lead researcher in the Harvard experiment, served with the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which was a forerunner of the CIA. Murray applied for a grant funded by the United States Navy, and his Harvard stress experiment strongly resembled those run by the OSS. Beginning at the age of 16, Kaczynski participated along with 21 other undergraduate students in the Harvard experiments, which have been described as disturbing and ethically indefensible. You remember the Unabomber blew up that building, and taking himself in the process. And he was talking about, I think he was ranting at the time about government conspiracy and what they were doing to the American people. And the whole thing has been played off as a crazy guy that blew a building up. But now, and I didn't know this until I read this, that they were experimenting on him as well with MK Ultra. Now you understand why he blew a fucking building up. Merry prankster Ken Kesey, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, volunteered for MK Ultra experiments while he was a student at Stanford University. Kesey's ingestion of LSD during these experiments led directly to his widespread promotion of the drug and the subsequent development of hippie culture. So thank the CIA for hippie culture. Candy Jones, American fashion model and radio host, claimed to have been a victim of mind control in the 60s as well. Infamous Irish Bob boss James Whitey Bulger volunteered for testing while in prison. So aside from Charles Manson, Whitey Bulger was another prisoner that was tested under MK Ultra. Robert Hunter is an American lyricist, singer, songwriter, translator, and poet, best known for his association with Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead. Hunter was an early volunteer test subject for the MK Ultra program. He was paid to take LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline and report on his experiences, which were creatively formative for him. Something that McNally wrote. Sit back, picture yourself swooping up a shell of purple with foam crests of crystal drops. Soft nigh they fall into the sea of morning creep, very softly mist, and then sort of cascades, tinkly bell like. Must I take you by the hand, ever so slowly, type. This is while he's under the effects of drugs under MK Ultra. And then conglomerate suddenly into a peal of silver, vibrant, uncomprehendingly, blood singingly, joyously, resounding bells. By my faith, if this is insanity, then for the love of God, permit me to remain insane. McNally, 4243. Incidents. Dr. Frank Olson commits suicide. This is one of the scientists involved in it, I believe. No. Let's see. Early on the 28th of November 1953, Frank Olson, a U.S. Army civilian biochemist and biological weapons researcher, jumped to his death from a hotel room in New York after suffering a severe reaction to LSD that he consumed as part of a CIA-led research program on the intelligence application of drugs and other behavioral modification techniques. The program, codenamed MKUltra, was disclosed in 1975 during the Rockefeller Commission and Church Committee investigations of dubious agency activities and became one of the most notorious episodes publicized during the CIA's time of troubles in the mid-1970s. Over the years, the revelations about Olson's death have generated many unfounded conspiracy tales that still circulate in publications and movies. So we're going to be moving into some of the other files here. Okay. Now, bear in mind for new people that are that are joining us, many of the Project MK Ultra files were destroyed, and this is everything that they've been able to retrieve from a separate off-site storage location that the CIA didn't get to in time. Here's a black and white photo here of Frank Olson, the researcher that killed himself after and under the experimentation on MK Ultra. I'm going to stop it here today. We've done almost an hour. If you guys like this and you want to hear more, this is directly from the CIA's files. This is directly from the CIA's website. I'm sure they're not happy that they have to post all of this, but they have orders through FOIA requests, through government actions, that they have to make all this information available to the public. And I wanted to kind of start a side project for my show where we talk about these unscrupulous actions, horrible actions by the CIA against the American people, Canadian people, people around the world, right? This is what we're seeing here as we're getting into the MK Ultra files, or at least the ones that survived. So I'm going to cut it off today, and I'm taking a break tomorrow, and then I'm going to be with you all for the live stream starting at 6 p.m. on the 5th, on November 5th, in order to do the election. All right. When we get to those points where we go into a lull with the voting, where we're waiting for polling stations to close, we're waiting for updates for new numbers coming out of different polling places, different states, etc. If you guys are interested, in between those lulls and those boring times where we're really not getting updates on any of the voting and information, I'm happy to jump right back into these CIA files in order to fill in some of the time. So bear that in mind. If you're interested in hearing more, I'm going to take a pause right here with MK Ultra, and we're going to get back to it again in a couple of days. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it, and join me on the 5th for the election live event that I'm going to run on my own. We're going to have multiple sources. We're going to be covering all the voting around the nation, and in between that, we'll jump into the CIA files. All right. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thanks again. Like and subscribe, and I appreciate the support. Thank you, everyone.